So the purpose of us doing a mock standardisation meeting is to make sure that everything's prepared and ready for the standardisation meeting that we have at the end of this week coming. Okay, so we are on the 14th of May 2025. We have a standardisation meeting on the 16th of May 2025. In that meeting, we are going to be looking at units 2 and units 4. Okay, those are the units that are done. These are the units that we can get signed off. So that is what we're going to be looking at. Okay, so the purpose of a standardisation meeting is to ensure that the standards are being upheld in terms of the criteria that's being asked to be sought out by Pearson's, and that our trainees are completing to the correct standard, okay? And that adequate spelling, punctuation, and grammar is being used throughout, okay? Right. So we're going to go through one. I'm not looking at the assessment records at the moment. We're just going to be looking at the work, okay? We'll do this assessment records another time. All right. Okay. So we have John Taylor. So at the moment, just looking at the front of the sheet, he's put his name at the top, which is great. He's signed it, but there's no date. And the assessor hasn't signed it either or put a date. So the assessor is you.
Yep.
Okay. So we need to make sure that all of that stuff is completed before we get to Friday. Okay. So first page, unit 2, make sure that the assessor's name is written in, the handout date. So the handout date is normally the first day of the programme.
Okay.
Okay, and then the hand-in deadline is the last day of the programme.
Okay.
Okay, so make sure that that information is in there. Okay. So we are looking at the criteria
Yep.
for this unit. So AP1 is to outline places where job vacancies can be found. Okay. Criteria AP2, describe the importance of the information that may be provided by a job advertisement or an application pack. AP3, describe information that may be required when applying for a job. BP4, explore and select an appropriate job role to apply for. Okay, and then we have BP5 down here, to complete a job application form and covering letter to meet the requirements of a selected job. So that's what we're going to be looking for in terms of the assessment record. Okay, so making sure that all of that information has been put on there. Okay, but in terms,
What
yep.
about these?
So it's the criteria for
Okay.
each unit.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So when you are completing your assessment records, that is what you are marking the work on. Okay. So if they've hit all of those criterias, then they've passed that unit.
Yep. No,
Okay. So we're not going to be creating an assessment record and writing it all up saying that they've not passed it,
Yeah.
because then that's just a waste of paper. So if they've not hit that criteria, then it goes back to them to make sure that they complete that unit work.
Okay.
So then you can pass them. Okay, and then when you get to the standardisation meeting, Rosie will mark it so she can say, okay, then I agree that the criteria has been hit for all of these different points. So then she will sign it off.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So in terms of the work, so we're just going to be looking at the work at the moment, and then we will look at the criteria in terms of the assessment records. Okay, so Worksheet 1A, explore sources of information for potential employment. So we have a spelling mistake here. We can see, so we're just going to go over this, just making sure that everything's done. Okay, so there's spelling mistakes there that's been picked up. So obviously this is going to go back to John so that he can correct that, ready for Friday. Okay.
And where would you do it? Just put it there?
Yeah, so he'll write it next to it, and he'll write it in a different colour pen, so then we know that
Yeah,
he's
he's
looked at
done
it and he's done it. Okay. So turning the page, he's completed everything here. Cannot see any spelling mistakes, and we've got feedback at the bottom. So that's great. So we've got a bit of feedback there that's being given back to John, so then he can look at that and think, okay, then I've done this piece of work good, to a good standard. It says good reflections on what type of employment is suitable for you. So that's a nice piece of feedback for him. Okay. Here we have a job application that he has completed, and he's also highlighted it
Yeah.
as well, the important facts of information and why it's important for an employer to know this. Okay, so making sure that even though it's not the actual unit work, that spelling and punctuation and grammar is being used all the way through. Okay, so we make sure that all of that has been done. If there's any feedback that can be added on to things, we like to give as much feedback as possible so that they can feel like, okay, then they can see where they're improving, or perhaps where there's places that they can improve. Okay. So we're now on worksheet 2. We're having a look at the highlighted CV here. So this is a template. So we're looking at this to see whether they've completed all the information that's been asked of them here, and whether it's been highlighted correctly, and whether spelling, punctuation and grammar has been used as well. Okay, so feedback has been added to the bottom, yeah, and they've they've asked John to read the feedback and complete what's been asked of them. Okay, so there are opportunities for you to give feedback to get more information out of them. That's perfectly fine to do. Okay, but when you're doing that, make sure that when they then have that, when they have the work back to complete it, that they've actually hit that.
Yeah.
They've actually answered what you've asked them to do. So ask them to leave any pieces of writing that you've stuck onto their work. Just ask them to leave that so you can have them
Go back.
Yeah, go back to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's
Yeah, and he would change the colour pen.
yes.
Corrections,
Yeah.
if there were.
It's a standard thing that we ask them to do. So when they're doing any corrections, that they go back over it in a different colour pen so that we know that they've completed it. Okay. So again, here we're trying to elicit more information out of them here. So he's not completed that. So obviously it's going to go back to him so he can complete that, ready for Friday. Okay. So we'll have a look, make sure that all the spellings being looked at. If there are any mistakes there, that there's a line that's been put underneath it, an SP at the bottom. It's a standard practice that we do when we're going through the work. Okay, so here is John Taylor's first cover letter. So obviously it's been marked and there has been feedback there. So there may be 2 or 3 cover letters and CVs in their work. So if they've received the amendments and completed it and handed it back in, but they've had further amendments, that's why. But we like to put all of them in so that you can see the journey of completion. Okay. So there's a lot of feedback there, but the first update here, there's a lot less on this cover letter, which is great. And then we have the second updated cover letter where it's just ticks there. It's gone through, and we're all happy with that, which is great. Okay. Again, there is a cover letter template here where they are expected to do the same thing in terms of, highlighting what they feel is important, and then talking about why it's important for an employer to know this, and they're describing that. So you can see at the top there, it's got describe written bigger and underlined and bold to make sure that
Describe.
they're describing, because sometimes they explain instead of describe. So we want to make sure that they are hitting the criteria and they're doing what's being asked of them. Okay. So here we have descriptions of important information to include on a cover letter. So again, they're describing those different points, and then they're explaining what would happen if they didn't include this information that they've put here. Okay, so I'm making sure that it makes sense, that they've explained it well, so that we understand it. Okay. So here we go. So again, with the CVs, the cover letters, you watch the journey. So there's a lot of information there. There's a lot of feedback there. Then there's a lot less feedback on the first update. Then the second update, great, not too bad. Well, there's a third update because there was a small
Yeah.
bit that was caught there, and then that's been amended, which is great. Okay, so we're going through, making sure that all the spelling's done correctly. Here we have noted that this word has been misspelled.
Yeah.
So we've underlined it, we put SP at the bottom. Okay. So here we asked them to write down two referees or two references that they could call on in terms of when he applies for that role. If they ask for a reference, that he knows he's got two references that he can ask. Okay?
Yeah.
So we make sure that they have viable references. Okay? So obviously we have the worksheet at the top. What makes a suitable reference, and who makes a suitable reference, and who makes an unsuitable reference. So that if they then write out their referees and they say, oh well, my first referee is my cousin or my best friend, then okay, then is that a suitable reference? Why isn't it suitable? And then encourage them to put in a suitable reference.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, here we're just making sure the spelling, punctuation, and grammar has been adhered to. There's a spelling mistake here, so obviously that's going to go back, and he's going to rectify that. Okay. In terms of important information in an application pack or job description, that is then their opportunity to give us more information and for them to find that out, why it's important. Here we have one spelling mistake here. So obviously he's going to have to go back and do that. But other than that, from what I can see, I can't see any others, which is great. Okay, so from their application, from the job description that they printed out and highlighted, they then write up that job role. So they find out information about that particular role. Okay, what the salary is, where it's located, skills required for the job, how those skills are applied to them, so how they have an opportunity to share that, and then important information about the company, and then the relevant experience, and then they're talking about their passion and and why they'd be suited for the role.
What
Okay,
if they originally mess up the sheet? Can we just give them another one?
give them another one and ask them to complete it again. Okay, if it's just like a little bit, we've got two pet notices. You can just
You're allowed to use them.
yeah, you can use them. That's fine, and then they can just write over it. But if they've messed up the whole page, just give them another sheet. Okay.
I know you've got a learner only know their first initial, so I'll go with Al. You're saying writing is a mess. How do you, what do you do when you can't read it? If they're just simply not
Yeah. So
working with them?
yeah. So when you have those instances, that's a longer piece of work that you need to do with them. So it's about identifying. Is this something that they've struggled with? Do they see whether it's an issue? Because obviously, when we start the program, inside the inside insert of their folders, there is a professional standards page in there, and we talk about professional standards of folders because it's not just them that's reading that work. We also have to read it and be able to understand it. So we have to make sure that it's legible, that we can read it as well. Some people have issues in terms of not being able to write any neater than what they already do, and we have a person on this current cohort at the moment who's using their laptop to write things down. If they really do struggle, they can't write any neater. That is an option for them to do. Okay.
The training that types on the computer, would they be typing on these specific
Yeah. Yeah.
worksheets?
Yeah.
So can we give your learners an option? Or you
We
don't?
we don't give them the option, but if they are finding it hard, we can say to them, "This is what we can do. This is what we can do for you," instead of, "Okay, well, you can either do this or do this." For the most part, it will be them writing it out. If they really do struggle, then that is an opportunity for them to use a laptop. They can bring in a laptop or they can use one of ours. Okay. We ask that once they've applied for the role, that they then screenshot it and send it through to us. So we've got a copy that they've actually applied for that role. Okay, and then we put it in their folder work. Okay.
Yeah.
And then on this page, this is your opportunity to provide feedback on the application form. So this
Yeah.
page really, what information they've put in, what's good about it, and then any actions for them to improve on, you can put down here. Okay.
Yeah.
So that is basically how we go through a piece of a unit.
Yeah.
Basically, when we go through the standardisation meeting on Friday, we will be working towards certain criteria. So Sonal is just going to go through the different topics, and then I'll discuss that.
The first one is valid, relevant to the standards for which competence attainment is claimed.
Okay, so is it valid? Is all of this information, is it valid to the work that what's being asked of them?
Yeah.
So it's all valid well, it's going to be valid because we've completed an assessment record and we are corroborating the validity of the work. So it always has to be valid. So it will be valid.
The second one is authentic. Has it been produced by the learner?
Okay, so authenticity is really, really important. Obviously, in terms of any work that they do, it has to come from them.
Yeah.
So there will be opportunities where we write on the board or we write on the flip chart paper. We ask that they don't just copy it word for word, that they have that they put it into their own words, how they can understand it better. Okay, so then it's an option for them to really start thinking about the different ways in which they can write out that particular sentence. Okay.
Next one is current, sufficiently recent for assessors to be confident that the learner still has the same level of skills or knowledge.
Okay. So we're making sure that that it's being completed in a timely manner. So as they've completed this, we've marked it, and it's going to IV, it's going to standardisation. So it's not being done like 6 months ago,
Yeah.
and then we're just looking at it now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then it's reliable, genuinely representative of the learner's knowledge and skills.
Yeah. So making sure that it's their work again, and that they're not using other people's words to populate the work. That
Yeah.
it has to be theirs.
There.
Okay.
And then you've got sufficient, meets all the requirements of the standards in full.
Yeah. So being sufficient, that there's enough information, there's enough detail there to give their answers, so that we can understand where they're coming from. Okay.
Yeah.
And you've got SPAG,
So SPAG is spelling, punctuation, and grammar. So making sure that they're spelling things correctly. If they haven't spelt it correctly, that we've picked it up. And if they've not completed that spelling, it's still there.
Yeah.
But we've noticed it. Punctuation, your full stops, your commas, apostrophes, colons, semicolons, making sure that all of those things are being used and in the right way as well. And grammar, that it makes sense, that it reads well, that they're not just writing down words for the sake of writing down words. Okay.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
and then you've got quality of feedback.
So we also get marked in terms of the feedback that we give as well. So we want to be making sure that we're giving feedback regular, often, and it's so that they can understand it as well. And if there's opportunities for you to stimulate further questions, so you're trying to push them a little further potentially. You probably won't do that with everybody, but for the people that you think, actually, I think that they can do more, that you're asking you're challenging them, and you're asking them those questions to give them an idea, and to give that further detail to their answers.
And then last one is differentiation.
Differentiation. So differentiation is just making sure that everything is there that needs to be there, and making sure that it all makes sense, basically, that it all comes together, and that it's all relevant. Okay.